Good day, Andre van Rooyen here. This presentation is about how farmers adjust their mental models through experimental learning and innovation platforms and the incentives created by other technologies and interventions. We know that agriculture are very complex systems, and irrigation makes it even more complex because the simple decision of when and how much to irrigate can be a daunting task and have many unintended consequences. We see in irrigation schemes throughout Africa a long list of challenges and problems, and too often we isolate these problems and address them individually. But within complex systems where many things are connected and many actors and players interact with one another, that result in non-linear dynamics and, as I've said, unexpected consequences, we need to re-look at how we address the problems of these kinds of complex systems so that we can address systemic issues and not just interventions based on linear thinking. Donella Meadows produced this list of 12 entry points into complex systems with increasing potential to bring about systemic change. You can work at the level of parameters. It's quite easy to work there, or feedbacks, which is a little bit more difficult. But it's only when you get to the combination of feedbacks and design and intent of the system that you end up with very strong leverage points. In other words, the capacity to bring about more changes in the system than the energy you put in. In our project in Zimbabwe, Mozambique, and Tanzania, we worked at two broad entry points. One is around soil monitoring tools, and the other around agricultural innovation platforms. So one is very technical, and the other one is addressing the socio-economic issues. And you will see that the interaction of these very strong leverage points have resulted in significant impact. Let me start with a short description of innovation platforms. It's where we bring farmers into the development arena together with many other stakeholders and interested parties. And instead of on the left where people used to shout like at a soccer match instructions from outside to farmers in what to do, when to do, and how to do it, with innovation platforms, we bring everybody into the arena, and everybody becomes, and all institutions become integral part and very well connected with farmers and other institutions to change systems. So yes, this takes a long time, and it's very intensive, and you need to start with very careful and deep systems analysis, bringing everybody together, making sure that everybody understands that their voice is heard and that the different directions at which people look at problems are addressed. So as I've said, you can come up with a list of problems, but if you look at that circular arrangement of problems, identifying ways and interventions to fix them individually may fix that individual problem, but quite often, as we know, when the project finishes, farmers just fall back into their old state of what they were doing before, and change is not sustainable. It doesn't always expand through the rest of the system. So we encourage, and from the outputs of this work you will see that there are great opportunities to work with farmers, identify what they want to do, and then get to a point in which you can co-design interventions. We have found that doing visioning exercises where we ask farmers to draw out their current state and the future state, they can very clearly articulate what the problems are and what are the states that they want to move towards. And this provides great incentives for people to visualize their future and to begin to consider a path towards that new future. In this project, we also, apart from the innovation platforms, introduced some very interesting monitoring tools. The one on the left is a so-called full stop or wetting front detector, in which you can determine how much nutrients or nitrogen and specifically are leached beyond the root zone. In other words, farmers then lose all the investments made in fertilizer. These are very simple but very effective technologies. The sensor array in the middle essentially consists of 3 sensors that you can again plant at different depths in relation to the root structures of the plants that you want to measure. And each of these probes will give you a result when you connect it to the tool is either red, green, or blue. Red being the soil is too dry, green it's still good, and blue is that it is saturated. And integrating the results of these 2 tools, farmers have learned a huge amount. So first of all, you need to decide how much water you want, how often you need to irrigate, and how much you need to irrigate. And if it rained, how much do you need to irrigate then, if at all? So through this work, we spend more time in facilitating learning than training. And it also gave us a very strong indication of what the differences are between just learning and training, and what happens when people start developing their own mental models around how much to water and when to water, and how does that water leach nutrients below the root zone. And those, as I've said, are very strong incentives for farmers to rethink their mental models or their paradigms on how much water a plant or a crop really need. So based on this information, we looked at how farmers adjusted and learned and experimented with how do you reduce the irrigation frequency and intensity. And I want to note here that none of these were trained by the project. This is all farmers' experimentation. So we've seen at the end of the project, compared to the beginning in 2013-14, that the number of irrigation events in Silalachane in Zimbabwe reduced from once a week or 18 irrigation events down to 8.5 irrigation events in the entire cropping season. Farmers also reduced the number of siphons they used from 9 to 8. They reduced the hours or the amount of time that they were irrigating a plot from 4 to 2. And the amount of irrigated waters consequently went down from 30 millimeters to 13 millimeters per event. So we see that where farmers were irrigating once a week, after 3 years of learning and experimentation, they were only irrigating every 15 days. Skipping some of that data, I'll get to the bottom line. So the water productivity, in other words, the kilograms of maize produced per cubic meter of water, was 200 grams of maize produced in 2013-14 compared to 1.28 kilograms of maize. So that is a significant increase in the amount of maize produced per cubic meter of water. So clearly farmers were over-irrigating, but we needed to find more elegant ways in which farmers can learn and adjust their behavior and become a lot more efficient. So this brings me to the complexity of irrigation and the interventions, and I'm not going to go through this influence diagram, but it clearly illustrates the interactions between the biophysical outcomes and the socio-economic outcomes and impacts from these 2 leverage points that we used. The unintended consequences here is that we also found that farmers have reduced, or there's a significant reduction in conflict within the schemes, between schemes, upstream and downstream. Farmers are able to pay for school fees. They are able to increase their inputs, and a whole range of positive outcomes, from ensuring that farmers have the capacity to adapt their behavior, and if they see negative outcomes, they can manage around them. So this is all about adjusting mental models, and this is a little graph I published some time ago in which I speculated that mental models is an outcome of the interaction between farmers' objectives or aspirations, their social learning, the feedback from their biophysical world, how they change things, and then changing inputs or managerial strategies, and that in itself will have different outcomes. So adjusting mental models is a long process that requires a lot of learning, experimentation, adjusting, adapting, adopting, and evaluation. The results of all of this very clearly indicate that from a biophysical point of view, farmers have increased both the yields and the income. And the income was also an outcome of the work with the innovation platform in linking farmers to better markets. But the incentives that I alluded to in the beginning relates to the fact that farmers are now more able to pay for inputs, to pay for education, to buy more food and more healthy food, and to invest more in housing construction. So we'll see that while the tools have had big impacts on production and income, the greater incentives lie in the socio-economic world. So what has all of this got to do with value propositions? And I tried to summarize it in this diagram, where the products and the services are innovation platforms, which is a sort of a social intervention, and then the soil and water nutrient monitoring tools that assisted farmers in turning their pains into gains, and we see that earlier strict irrigation scheduling resulted in a lot of leaching of nutrients, increased labor, and while poor market access together with low yields resulted in significant pain, with the interventions of these tools, farmers were now able to make those decisions about whether they need to irrigate or not based on the integration of soil moisture and nutrients leaching. So farmers also had a role to play in this. They engaged in a lot of learning and experimentation. They had to adjust their irrigation frequencies. Often this had a huge amount of risk when you're not sure what's going to happen with your crop if you don't irrigate. So there's a lot of words like trust that farmers used in making us and helping us understand how this process played out. We've also seen a significant amount of information being shared amongst farmers. I didn't report on it in this presentation, but in the papers you can read that many farmers who did not have access to these tools have also changed their behavior. So looking at these value propositions, I would say that it's a very interesting way to look at interventions, to try and understand the dynamics and the interplay between interventions and how the pains and the gains and the pain relievers and gain creators can help farmers to adjust their mental models. But I would like to conclude and say that there are many more players in this arena, and it's not just value propositions for farmers that are important. We should also look at this in terms of what is the value proposition for extension officers, for NGOs, for governments, for policymakers, and how can we use this concept of value propositions within agricultural research and development to work for more than just farmers. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to conclude by saying that implementing your value proposition across the entire socio-economic biophysical space, from where you innovate around problems and solutions, intervening with innovation platforms, with technologies, backstopping farmers, all the way to what markets provide in returns to those investment, will move your value proposition to significant impact. And with that, I would like to thank you for your time. Much appreciated.